Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
How many of you know anything about diffusion? Yeah? We know the diffusion equation. The equation for diffusion basically says that things, think about how gases spread outwards. That's the equation that governs it. And that's classically the bell curve. So if I point up there, basically the bell curve, the whole curve would look like that. So it's like a top hat function. It starts and goes and comes down. What I've got up here is the left-hand side of the curve, because we're all interested in growing businesses. We're not interested in the bit of managing their decline on the right-hand side. So that's why we look at the left-hand side. Okay? And this is really about how valuation depends on the maturity of a business. So what I've got in here is I've got this curve and I've got three chasms. And a chasm is basically what you would imagine it to be. It's a gulf or a gap that you have to jump over. And what this means is that businesses, as they're growing, typically they can grow steadily, but they hit these gaps where things get tough, they get rough, and you have to know how to cross those chasms, right? And there are three chasms. Now, what I've called the classical Moore chasm, chasm 3, is there's a book called Crossing the Chasm written by Geoffrey Moore. Anybody here read it? Geoffrey Moore's book, and he talks about the classic challenges of high-tech marketing, but that's actually the third chasm, and it relates to a particular set of circumstances. There are two other chasms. So if I just spend a little bit of time walking through this, and this may relate to some or all of you. So if you look in there, you start off, if I can get this to work, but I can't, so I won't. If you look at the left-hand side, the idea development. So this is the bit where you have an idea, and you're generating ideas or filtering them, and then you think, this is a great idea. If only I could actually demonstrate it working. So you talk to people and they say, yeah, I'd love to invest, or I'd love to follow this through, but show it to me working. Show me how it works. I'm not expecting a full production version, but just show me even a prototype. And that's the first chasm. So that's the first developmental chasm, because at the end of it, you have a proof of concept, you have a demonstrator, and you start to have an outlined business plan. And that first hurdle, most of you are very familiar with if you come out of R&D or tech backgrounds, and that's something you kind of instinctively say, yeah, I've got to show it to somebody, I've got to demonstrate it. There are people who occasionally will give you money just on the basis of an idea without even seeing a demonstrator. I've done that twice in my life, and once I regretted it deeply, and the other time we got lucky. So it's an important phase in terms of being able to demonstrate what the idea is about. And when you have that, then the people who are actually going to play with that early demonstrator are the early adopters. They're the people who don't mind that it doesn't work properly because they're so enthusiastic. You know, the first in-car satellite navigation product, you read about TomTom and all these companies today, massive valuations. First product was actually developed by some people I knew who showed it to me working in a car. And basically, the people who used it in the car had to spend an hour every morning playing with the wires, connecting things, resynchronizing until it would work. But they were early adopters. They didn't mind that because they were so excited they could see where they were going in their vehicles. They didn't care about its reliability or anything else like that. So those are the early adopters. And then when you get beyond that point, you've really got to build some kind of beachhead. So you've actually got to say, this is great, but now I need 5, 10 customers who are using the real thing. Okay? And that's very important because at that point you've now ironed out all the issues around reliability, reproducibility of the performance, and getting those first 8 to 10 customers is very important because these customers will be the people who will send the message out to your broader customer base. So the brand positioning of those customers is very important. So if you have, picking up an example, somebody here is working on something to do with aerosols, right? Now, if you manage to persuade your first customer to be Procter & Gamble, for example, or some brand name that's or Reckitt and Coleman, who's associated with that space, then they're your early customers, and they do a lot in order to be able to get you to the mass customer base. So that's very important, and that hurdle can be quite hard because you have to do a lot of stuff to the product to persuade reasonable brand names, reasonable customers to be able to use your product and use it, and to be able to talk about using it. So they're your reference customers, right? And then the next bit is about being able to scale from that to go mass, which is what the Geoffrey Moore chasm is all about. It's saying, I got 10 customers and I spent 16 hours winning each customer. Now I want thousands of customers. How am I going to scale up? How am I going to cross this chasm? What are the marketing issues? What are the communication issues? What are the brand development issues? Now, you might think, why am I laboring the point about this cycle in a session on valuation? But the valuation curve and your valuation depends on where you are in that curve. And that's the first thing. When I talk to business, I look and say, roughly, where are these guys? Because that tells me something about the risks they face, because that's one set of things that if like the anchor pulling them down. The other is how much growth is there in the business. If they're right up at the top and they're mainstream, right up at the top part of the curve, then I'm not going to get much more valuation growth except by driving numbers, by revenues, just by growing customers. So the high growth part of a business is gone by that point in time. So investors coming in that point are very, very different. So the kind of financing and the kind of valuation parameters change depending on where you're in the curve. Okay, and so there's one thing you take away is when you're looking at your own business, decide where you are and think about how you package your story to investors in terms of what your valuation you want to put on it. If you're, the best place to be usually is about there, because you've gone through the first two chasms, and you go to investors and say, look, massive growth potential, we can really grow the business. So we're worth a lot of money, factor in the future, etc. And then investors get very excited, and venture capitalists particularly are very interested at that point in time, because they start saying, oh, can we do 100 times our money, and stuff like that. Okay?